My name is Peter Friedrich. I'm an independent journalist. I'm an author. And for the past 20-ish years, I have specialized in covering issues related to human rights in India, especially in the past 7 or 8 years, issues related to Hindu nationalism. But I'm also speaking to you as somebody who I really don't want to be here right now, as somebody who was raised in an explicitly Christian nationalist household. And you see, as Trump has been picking cabinet nominees for the past couple of weeks, there was a name that really popped out to me. And it is not actually Pete Hegseth, the nominee for the Secretary of Defense. It is the pastor who leads the church that Pete Hegseth goes to, or the network of churches, Doug Wilson in Idaho. Doug Wilson in Idaho is an explicitly Christian nationalist pastor, leads a network of churches, who is extremely influential. He was, when I was growing up, I thought he was a fringe figure. His books were on the bookshelves in my home, but I thought he was fringe. This year, he was on Tucker Carlson. This year, he's now the pastor that heads this network of churches that the Secretary of Defense comes from. And this year, well, I really don't want to be here.
Peter, we appreciate your courage.
Thank you, Peter.
And this year, Doug Wilson has that level of influence over the government. Doug Wilson, when I was growing up, I thought he was a fringe figure. His books were on the bookshelf in my house. He believes, and he and the network of people that he's linked to, believed in things that I was taught growing up. That homosexuals should be stoned. That women should only ever wear dresses. That women should not go to college. Probably men shouldn't either, but definitely not women. That women should be under the authority of their fathers until that authority is transferred over to their husbands. That we should establish the country, reestablish the country on the Torah, on biblical law, and that in retrospect, looking back on it, that we should preserve, quote unquote, American heritage, which in retrospect, I grew up in a house where all of this was taught. In retrospect, looking back on it, I came to realize how deeply it was rooted in white supremacy. I'm from California, and yet somehow growing up in the country, we flew a Confederate flag in my house. The people that we were connected with, that we listened to, that were speaking at my church, were coming from South Africa, having fought in Rhodesia, on the Rhodesian side, in favor of white supremacy. And then, I hadn't thought about Doug Wilson for decades, probably about 20 years. But then, his name came across my radar earlier this year, and it was before I saw that Pete Hegseth, the nominee for the Secretary of Defense, goes to a Doug Wilson-affiliated church. In July, Doug Wilson's name came across my radar because I've spent the past 20-ish years working on issues related to human rights in India, including exposing how the current government in India is massacring Christians in India. And I saw in July at the National Conservatism Conference how Doug Wilson, once I thought he was a fringe figure, now he's apparently in the mainstream, how he was there as a major primary speaker, and he was going and he was speaking alongside a speaker from the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, which is a paramilitary in India, which espouses a Hindu nationalist ideology, which very much like Doug Wilson's Christian nationalist ideology, seeks to transform India into an exclusively Hindu nation. And he was also speaking alongside a speaker from the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, the political wing of that RSS paramilitary, which currently rules India and has ruled India for the past 10 years, and which also espouses a Hindu nationalist ideology. And I realized, having grown up in a Christian nationalist household, and the thing is, I walked away from that 20 years ago. I walked away from that because I met people from India. I met people from another culture, from other religions. I met people who are attracted to the same gender, etc. And I realized 20 years ago that those meetings mean that I have to abandon that ideology and adopt the teachings of Jesus, that we are supposed to do unto others, we are supposed to love the least of these, we're going to be judged according to how we treat the least of these, etc., etc. And hell no, like, we're not mandated to establish a theocracy on earth, which is what I was raised to do. I was raised to establish a theocracy on earth. We're not mandated to do that. We're mandated to work for the kingdom of heaven, which is not of this earth. And I learned that from meeting Indian people, especially. And now, today, 20 years later, I'm standing here because all of these figures, their books were on my bookshelves. This gentleman, Doug Wilson, he wasn't in my home, but many of the other figures who were at the time leaders and have now been fallen into scandal, who were leaders of this theocratic movement in America, were in my home. And now, 20 years later, I'm looking at this, and as somebody, a journalist, an activist, working on issues related to Hindu nationalism, I'm disappointed, but beginning to realize that the fight against Christian nationalism and the fight against Hindu nationalism have become one and the same. And our mandate as believers, as people who want to follow Jesus, is to fight against the twisting of our faith and the combination of our faith with politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. I know that took incredible courage on your part to confront what you grew up with and speak the truth and the impact on your life. And I thought it was really profound that you had to leave the United States to see the humanity through the eyes of a different culture, the humanity of others.